chapter 2 is called The African Background of New World Religions. And you notice I've got this term Diaspora up there. What does that mean? That's a term that's not only important for this chapter, but also for some other chapters. Are you familiar with that term? Diaspora? Again, it comes from Greek. It comes from the word actually to scatter, spattering. Diaspora means to scatter all over the place. Like you guys remember the parable of the sower in the Gospels? A guy went out to sow his field, and then when you read it, you're like, boy, this guy doesn't know farming at all, because he threw the seed all over the place, and some of it went on the road. You're like, what's wrong with him? Some of it went on the rocky part. Again, who throws seed like that? Well, he's diasporing. He's throwing it all over the place. A diaspora is when people wind up going all over the place. People who are originally in one place, who originally have a kind of unity of culture and a continuity with that land, are sent everywhere. Now, how did that happen with Africans in the New World? Yeah?
It's like trade.
Exactly. Now, slavery was a pretty much universal practice in any society that developed beyond a certain level from antiquity on. But it takes on different configurations depending on culture. And in the New World, slavery was very much used as an economic institution, the way it was in other places as well. But it became tied in with notions of race in ways that it hadn't been before. And where did most of the slaves for the New World come from? Africa, but where in Africa? All over the place? Yeah.
Also the western coast.
Yeah, very good. I mean, some from, the Portuguese would take them from, what's nowadays Angola, but for the most part they're coming from countries like, now modern-day Nigeria, Benin, Liberia, right? Liberia is founded by freed slaves. This entire western coastline. Why? Because it's close. It was closer to the New World. Brazil was a very important place, actually, for that. And if you look at the distance between Brazil and West Africa, it's not very far at all, comparatively speaking. So this is what we call involuntary migration, involuntary immigration. And he goes on and talks about this. He says there were different ways in which this played out. And we're interested in the religious aspects right now. So in South America and the West Indies, or when you see that, think Caribbean. I don't know if that's spelled right. Does anybody know?
There's 2 B's.
2 B's, thanks. That looks better. What happened there? Well, there were more continuity of practice, of culture, and why? Well, because slaves outnumbered the people who were bringing them over vastly. And so they couldn't break it up. Haiti is a great example. Haiti was also, Haiti is one side of the island. The Dominican Republic, Saint Domingue, is the other side. And there it was primarily slaves that were brought in, and there weren't that many people controlling them, especially Europeans. Europeans tend to die pretty quickly, in the Caribbean and in South America. So there wasn't the same sort of corrosive, dissolving influence that happened in North America. There was less continuity. In part because the slaves were being brought into not just, places, but cultures that already were exerting their influence. There was a very important other distinction, though, between what was going on in North America, especially in the British-controlled areas, and what was going on in the rest of the Americas. What do you think it was? What was the other key factor that had to do with whether you could preserve, for the most part, or whether you had to leave behind your ancestral religion? Part of it is they're not paying attention to you, so you get to do what you want. But there was another factor as well. When they were paying attention to you. Again, let's use an example from our life that we can relate to. You guys are familiar with a double entendre, right? What's a double entendre in speech? So when you say one thing, but you really mean another. And oftentimes we do this with sexual things. We say things that are on the surface very innocent, but can be kind of dirty because they mean different things. And if you were to say that like in the classroom, you'd be okay because your teacher would not be able to punish you because you would say, I only meant this. I'm only talking about this, when really you're saying something way over here, right? Now imagine doing that with religion. How might you do something like that with religion? If you wanted to continue to practice your religion, what you're used to, what you believe in, what gives meaning to your life, especially now that you're in a really crappy existence, enslaved, people telling you what to do in a place that smells funny, everything tastes different, you have no idea what's going on as far as long-term prospects. How might you disguise your religion? Yeah.
Well, particularly the South America and West Indies, a lot of Africans try to adopt a lot of the Catholic views, so portray their former gods or gods as Catholic saints. Exactly.
Within Protestant Christianity, and we're going to see why when we look at some of these other chapters, there was this notion that Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy, they were even sometimes going after the Anglicans on this, because the Anglicans were still pretty liturgical, was way too, into saints and rituals and things like that. And we're not going to do that. We want just the word, or whatever rituals we've designed and see as important. It was much more difficult for African slaves to preserve any sort of religious identity under those sorts of things, because there's no anchor points that they could attach things to. Whereas if you're in a Catholic country, and the Roman Catholics already have all these statues to saints, why not, if you want to keep on worshiping the gods, or in this case the Orisa or the Loa, who you think are important to you, why not call them saints? Why not assimilate them? And so what goes on is a process of what we call hybridization or syncretization. He says, you shouldn't use the word syncretization. I think that's being a little bit fastidious in a certain sense. This is what brings about what we call these African diaspora religions. And we'll talk about some of the exact shapes that these take on, but what would some of these be?
He was talking about, I think in Haiti, with the combination of French Catholicism, you had Vodun, or how they spelled it.
Yeah, Vodun actually not only blends together the Roman Catholic, cult of the saints, but also some French Freemasonry as well. Which becomes, where does it become voodoo? New Orleans, right, because there's emigration from Haiti after the Haitian Revolution, very important event, to not only New Orleans, but to Louisiana in general. And then he also talks about this as it spreads out, sort of losing its integrity as a sort of systematic religion and degenerating into a bunch of folkways, a bunch of practices. Sometimes this is also called root work. And this is the one that probably more Americans are familiar with because it's had a presence here in the United States for a longer time. A bit more important on the world scene would be what are often called the Ife or Yoruba-based religions. Which do you remember those being? Yeah.
Is it Santeria?
Yeah. Literally the way of the saints, right? This is a way for, and that would be Cuba and some of the other neighboring areas. This would be a way for Yoruba derived slaves, and the Yoruba are one of the largest peoples in West Africa, one of the most influential ones. So a lot of slaves are taken from Yoruba land. This was a way for them to continue to practice their religion under different aspects. There are other ones as well. Candomble in Brazil, also in Venezuela to a certain extent. Santeria is also sort of, in recent years, there's been a lot of interaction between Venezuela and Cuba. Shango in the Caribbean, Trinidad and Grenada, and then there's some other religions as well that are a bit smaller and don't play much of a role in the American scene, unless you get into very, very small ethnic communities like Camina and Obeah. But they're all basically doing the same thing. They're all taking a religious matrix, which is there, and their views, and putting them together. It's not really right to say that they're just blending them, because that makes it sound like, it's being watered down. Practitioners of Ife or Yoruba religions see what they're doing as just as legitimate as what's going on still in Nigeria today with the traditional Yoruban religion. As a matter of fact, if any indigenous religion has a claim to being called a world religion, it would be this. When I teach world religions, I teach it as a world religion because it's spread out across multiple continents, like Hinduism or Buddhism or Judaism or Christianity. So if we want to understand what's going on in these religions, what we would want to do then is go back and look at the stock from which they came. And I think the best way to do this in terms of Yoruba religion is to look at their notions of spiritual beings and then to talk a bit about divination. Let me see what. Okay, so we don't have that much time. So I'm going to go through this rather quickly. Spiritual beings. At the top of the hierarchy, we have this high god, Olorun, literally the owner of heaven. Olorun is heaven. So Olorun is the owner of heaven. And he's the beginning of everything. He creates the other ones who do things. The Orisa. And the Orisa or Orisha, depending on which pronunciation you're using. Those are sort of like, you could call them demigods or secondary spirits or something like that. Olorun is the high god. But he doesn't really have any worship as such, and people praying to him give him praise. He's actually a model for Yoruban manhood or fatherhood, to give without expecting anything else in return, because he gives the universe. But he leaves the day-to-day and even the big things to the Orisa. One of these is actually called his son. That would be one of the first Orisa to be formed, Orisha-Nala, or also called Obatala in Santeria. And there's a whole bunch of these. And they vary in power and they vary in what they do. I've got a handout that I'm working on for you, and I've also got a iLearn section, so I'm not going to talk about the specifics. I'll just bring up a few of them that are particularly important. Shango is originally a chieftain who eventually becomes one of these guys, and Shango is associated with thunder and strategy and male fertility. He's sort of a divine punisher if you're doing bad things. Sopona was originally a god of smallpox, and as smallpox has ceased to be an issue, he became associated with inoculations in general, and he's understood as always being like one step ahead of science. So guess which disease he's particularly associated with today in Africa?
HIV.
Exactly, HIV and AIDS. When new diseases arise, they come under the aspect of Sopona. Orishan La is, the one who actually creates the dry land that human beings live on. He's viewed as the embodiment of logic and reason. And it just keeps going on and on from there. And these are the beings that tend to be worshipped, prayed to, engaged through ritual. There are priesthoods for all of these gods. Some of them are more important, some of them are less important, but they're all understood as basically being under the high god and as doing his or its work. They're all sort of deputies. And then we have other spiritual beings that play a role. One very important set would be the ancestors. And some of the ancestors actually, become Orisa, like Shango does, right? The ancestors would be your dead relatives, going back generations. In traditional African religions, the dead, at least if they were good, at least if people liked them, if not, they maybe go off to some bad place, are understood as being closer to the gods now. They're in the sort of time that's outside of the time that we're used to, the Ilid Tempus, as Eliot is calling it, and they can be used, they can be relied on as intercessors with things that are more powerful. So you want to actually retain connection with your ancestors because they care about you and they care about what happens to you, and you would want to keep on engaging in a continuous relationship with them. And there's discussions about what sort of rites are involved. In traditional Yoruba religion, the ancestors are actually personified by people who wear these, and I'm going to put some pictures in iLearn for you, these garments from top to bottom who are masked and who are there to sort of stand in for them. The other thing that I want to hit on that's particularly important is divination. Anybody know what this term means, divination? You've got that term divine in it, right? So you can guess it's going to have something to do with God or the gods. What is divination? Yeah?
Would it be like becoming divine, like some process?
No, it's not that, although that's a decent guess. That would be divinization. Yeah.
Maybe to be like inspired by a certain god or inspired by something?
Like being possessed by the way, possession happens within these things by the Orisa, or in Vodun by the Loa. And it's not exactly that, although that's getting closer to it. If somebody was in fact possessed by one of the gods, why would that be important? We see these movies and we think about possession, people are doing crazy stuff, but that's, these are good gods, so.
Did you worship or idolize?
Yeah, you could have a relationship with them that's sort of face-to-face, but why do you want to be connected with the gods? Worship is sort of, I give you, why am I doing that? I want something in return, right? What do we want from the divine quite often? Yeah.
It's like getting you more in touch with them and like kind of trying to find your purpose and.
Very good. It's a way to get information. Information, again, about how to restore that which has been disrupted, or how to fix what's gone wrong, how to unbreak what's broken, how to progress further. And in the Ife religions, one of the reasons why they're called the Ife religions is there are these priests, Babalawo, who are priests of Orunmila, one of the main Orisas, and they use generally nuts, palm nuts, or cowrie shells in this sort of device to cast lots, and then they consult a text, which a book doesn't tell you by name, but is very important, called the Odu Ife. The Odu Ife is a set of oral stories that have been passed down. They're actually quite long, and they'll cast lots and they'll say, okay, you've got this problem, I've cast the lots, now that refers to, 12 of these, there's 144 Odu Ife. I'll tell you the story, and then you and I sit here and try to figure out how that applies to your life and your situation. That's what the Babalawo does. And, these are very interesting stories, and you can often find something that's connected with it. It's very similar in many respects to, if any of you are familiar with the I Ching in Chinese, traditional religion with divination, casting the yarrow stalks. This is understood as a way to get information from the divine. And now, what would you want information about? Where you left your car keys? Probably not. Although that'd be helpful. Where you left your iPhone? If you lose your iPhone, you don't have that app, where's my iPhone? What else? What would you want information about?
Like the afterlife and what happens after?
That, but especially about this life. How should I live? What kind of person am I? Each person is understood as being under the realm of one of these Orisa. So if you are associated with Shango, it'd be good for you to know that so you don't screw up your life by trying to live like somebody who's actually suited to another thing. That's where we'll end today.